listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL Draft Odds Analysis and Preview for Friday, April 17th, 2020. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
Inside a week to the NFL Draft, Brian Blessing, Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. We're in Las Vegas as we're getting closer and closer, and things start to ratchet up in terms of information, disinformation, and it's been something that we focused on since most everything's been shut down. The NFL Draft's been the focal point of our thoughts, and it's going to get interesting, really interesting come next week. And obviously, the draft plays such a large role in the development of teams and immediate impact that can happen with rookies, not just first-rounders. Teams' fortunes can change, I think, a lot more than in the past. And does that sound like hype, Bruce? I don't think it is. I think we've kind of alluded to this in the past, but I think the GMs that know what they're doing, these middle-round picks, not only make teams, some of these guys, if they get it right, are finding starters in the fourth and fifth round.
Yeah, and the way that the salary stuff is set up with the NFL now, they're most of the rookies, most of the first round, most of the draft picks, all rounds make teams, at least their first year, and they do find starters often there. The trade market will start to move right about now. And as far as moving draft picks around, and that goes all the way up into the draft. And as the draft is proceeding, now that's going to be interesting to me, seeing how the communication works, because you usually see trades happening as the draft is taking place. And then, there's a jump in. Okay, let's interrupt with this latest trade here. When there was the Nerve Center in wherever it was, New York or Philadelphia, or would have been Las Vegas this year. I'm interested to see how those dynamics work, at least for the TV production. But as far as the trades go that impact the draft, they're going to start moving now, and really watch that right up to the draft. And as the draft starts, these teams are going to be shuffling around some of these picks.
And it starts, right? Like midweek this week, like out of nowhere, Atlanta is picking number 16. So all of a sudden, news comes out. Atlanta is one of several teams that are interested in moving up. Like really? Like the Falcons GM sitting there advertising, I'm going up. I mean, maybe they do. I mean, maybe it's, it's an insider that gets some good information. But why would you tip your hand and create a bidding war if you're Atlanta, or you're Atlanta and you're throwing it out there? Yeah, we're going to move up. And then other teams are sitting there going, oh, God, they're going to jump up. They want to jump up to 3 to get the cornerback or to take the kid from Clemson maybe, and Isaiah Simmons. So now teams that are maybe Atlanta's going to jump in. So now they're going to force somebody else to make not a panic move, maybe a panic move, to jump up. And Atlanta's sitting there the whole time going, we were never going to move up. We're hoping some other people go up and do something stupid, and then the guy we really want, the way it's slotted below him, the guy that we really want is going to fall in our lap.
Yeah, I've seen this throughout the years. There is so much disinformation, and so many stories come out. I mean, there's a lot of smoke screens. Sometimes teams put out false information here on who they're looking for and what they want to do. And you've got a very bored a legion of football writers right now who are just looking for things. Now they overreact anyway to stuff in the NFL draft, and most of their speculation is pretty meaningless. It's sort of like these guys who do the mock drafts and project trades and then make picks predicated upon their projections of trades. I mean, that's absurd. You see this stuff every year, and it's just, you sort of have to read through it all. That's why it's best just to kind of sit back here and see what happens. And 95% of these stories are just disinformation anyway.
Well, it was interesting. I believe in just about a half an hour before we started doing this, Ian Rappaport puts a quote out and says, I had a GM tell me, quote, the media is wronger about mock drafts this year than you guys have ever been. Point being, players are going to be taken in places no one expects. And then some other writer jumps in and says, just by the way the words were constructed in the sentence, he said, without doubt, that's Dave Gettleman. And you can see Gettleman having a stone in his shoe because he took so much grief and heat about the Daniel Jones pick, and a year later he looks pretty good for doing it. But now they're even sitting there, identifying someone else's anonymous source. But if Gettleman's right and saying it is a mock draft, and these guys talk to each other and they have their boards, there could be 4 or 5 guys in the first round that go in there, and the thing just turns into a dog's breakfast.
Yeah, and no one can really predict how this goes because the teams hold, close, most of the time who they're actually going to pick. I mean, we know, right at the top, what the Bengals are going to do, but after that, it gets kind of crazy. And it happens like that every year. The hardest thing, like I've mentioned before, is to actually project, and it's almost useless to project a first round before the draft happens. And especially then when you compare to somebody then there's other guys who like to project picks as they do it as the draft goes, and you make your you make your projection on who's going to be picked next after you've seen all the picks already. That's a little bit of a different game than the people like me who project the whole first round beforehand. But that's why, and the stuff I do, I like my write-ups in this stuff, which is up there at goldsheet.com and other places, to kind of focus on what the teams have done in the offseason. And I think that's kind of a more interesting read when you go into a draft than just simply speculating upon the players that are going to be picked. I have a player for each team, I think, but it fits into a bigger narrative of what the teams have been doing in the offseason, which is a more interesting topic, I think.
Well, I think one of the things, obviously from a betting perspective, there are numbers out there, things you can attack and form an opinion on. But one of the true beauties of this is if you're a sports fan, if you've got a team, it's a weird dynamic how your level of interest is through the roof or wanes based on where your team's picking or if they're even involved. I'm a Bills fan, and I follow every morning. I'm checking up on them and blah, 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 and they get Stephon Diggs and trade their first-round pick away. And I think it's a great move because they were going to pick a wide receiver anyway, so they get the proven commodity. So that's great, but all of a sudden they're not involved. So, well, what do? You ignore it, or if you have no life, you go even deeper now, and now you go all the way down into the pick of the 50s, and what are you going to get there? And that's the beauty of the NFL draft. These are players we watched, a lot of them, but then there are names like, okay, yeah, he was a great college player. But I think the beauty of this draft is if you're in the wheelhouse of a bunch of guys that are allegedly in contention to be on your team, you're going to YouTube and you're looking up highlights and videos of these guys that people actually invest so much time and energy that they've got a clue, what the guys that are in contention for that specific selection.
Yeah, and that's why it keeps us watching in day 2 and then even in day 3. After you get past day 1, and I think the format's the same, even though the venue's different this year. They're doing it right out of the ESPN. But the picks start coming a lot faster after the first day, and they've even been able to speed up the process in the first round. But it gets much faster when there's only 5 minutes between picks after that, and then the some of the teams don't even take that long. So it's actually kind of enthralling viewing if you want to, those who want to watch after the first round, the first day, and it gets into the second, third rounds and fourth rounds the second day. That's a little bit more, faster paced at least. So, but again, projecting who's going to be out there in the second, third round beforehand, that really gets crazy because you've got so many picks beforehand that could impact it. But you're right. You see guys that, and you end up taking a look at guys, and you'll remember some of the guys playing in college, and it's kind of a fun thing if you want to follow your teams in the draft.
And just like a normal getting ready for a game, the skill position guys are the sexy guys. I mean, the one thing about this, you get the beef. You get the linemen, offensive, defensive linemen, and those are the guys that build a foundation for a team. They may not be sexy, but they're critical picks. But quarterback is always, it's a passing league. So the quarterbacks, the crazy things kind of happen in a quarterback league in the first round, and to the point where running backs have been devalued. Will a running back go in the first round is a legitimate question. But the other one is, you look at some places, the bookmakers got over 5.5 wide receivers, over minus 244. There are some places that have over 6.5 wide receivers taken in the first round. That position is stocked. And I know you and I were having this discussion on my radio show yesterday. They're all terrific players. And if you said 7 wide receivers went in the first round, the odds are 3 of them are busts or just, journeymen. That's just the nature of the beast with this thing because it's an inexact science. But you could get finally a wide receiver goes and then there's a run on it, or all of a sudden all the talk and all the stuff, maybe it's a massive chunk of disinformation. They're all so good that guys go off the board in the first round and take a lineman or a linebacker who's the best or the best tight end at their position because the wide receiver position is so stacked that they'll say, no, I'm going to go get a great player at another position and still get an exceptional wide receiver in the second round. That position itself is just so intriguing.
Yeah, that can change the props for sure. And and you're right. There's so many that teams might wait into the second round. That impacted free agency too. And a lot of the teams that would have been in a market for a receiver, you would have thought in free agency, Raiders come up, at Denver, some others. They went out, or Buffalo found one in a trade. They went out and, but the Denver and the Minnesota and the Raider types, they're waiting for the draft to get their receiver, and they didn't go into free agency and get one of those. So whether they wait into the second round or not, that's another possibility. The other thing that humors me, and I've heard so many people talking about the draft, and you mentioned the running back thing, and that's almost become sort of taboo. And I've heard some guys on the TV and reading them, they say, okay, running backs are a waste now. This is the new era. You don't take running backs in the first round. Well, look, last year in the playoffs, look what Derrick Henry did last year. They can't tell me a big-time running back isn't still valuable. Now, I'm not sure if there's a Henry type this year, but this seems to be there's a herd mentality amongst guys who follow the draft and a lot of these GMs too. If you can find a big-time running back, they're still darn valuable. And I'm not sure if it's DeAndre Swift or it's Dobbins or somebody else this year is that guy. But, I put Swift in the first round in my projection. I had him going to Miami with its last pick. So I see some running back props out there, and it's like at a half over or under a half. I still think that one goes over, but we'll see.
Well, you mentioned the Diggs trade to Buffalo, and I'm curious, if you look at it, and you try to analyze it, I'm wondering if we can draw a conclusion. So Buffalo gives up their first-round pick, number 22, but then they also give up a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth-rounder and get a seventh-rounder back. So they were going to take a wide receiver there. Now, Diggs is exceptional, and it's funny. You go watch this guy, and we know he's really good and makes big plays. But when you go and you watch stuff, he's an incredible route runner. He's a proven commodity. Is he an off-the-field problem? Is he a diva and all that? But whatever. It ran its course in Minnesota. But the Bills are saying they're built to win right now, and they had really a couple of significant needs in the offseason. That was it, and this was the big one. So they get, I think, a phenomenal player. And I think everybody said, they overpaid. And I'm like, no, I think it's well worth the price to give up that other equity, because what it means for right now and the next 3 years, they are built to win right now. I think it's a smart move. But the question, and what do we learn from it, Bruce, is they identified him in a draft where people are salivating over all these guys, and they're sitting there saying, we want this guy. I mean, I get it. He's ahead of the curve because he's a veteran and he's a proven commodity. But in a weird way, were the Bills telling you that, yeah, they're all good players, but maybe it's not as deep as everybody's led to believe, and they were picking at 22 and thinking there were one or two guys that were really good and the other guys are like a coin flip. I mean, were the Bills sending you a message about the actual quality of this wide receiver pool?
That might be. That might be. And I think, too, in Buffalo's case, that Brandon Beane last year was in the free agent market, and he was he added some guys last year, but he was shooting high a year ago too. I mean, they were trying to get Odell Beckham last year too, and he ended up.
Tried to get Antonio Brown.
They
were in on Beckham, and they had made an inquiry about Diggs at the trade deadline.
Yeah. So he wanted to get something done, and they did, and they added some guys last year, Beasley and Brown, who ended up helping them. But I think they wanted to take the next step, and in their case, they thought, yeah, let's go ahead and let's get the proven commodity here. Minnesota was kind of interesting in this thing too, because the Vikings did not really go out in free agency and fill that role. For Diggs, I think they figure this is why I think Minnesota now with 2 first-round picks, if they keep them both, is likely to take one of these receivers in the first round. Because Diggs was a good weapon for them. They hadn't really replaced him yet in free agency, so they may have to do it in the draft. Now, there is talk about OBJ is now maybe rumors flying out there. Maybe Minnesota is going to go after him. It was a dollars thing for the Vikings, too. If they figure one of these rookies might be able to step in there, it'll cost them less than Diggs did this year. They may get some extra picks. It might work out better for them. It's a roll of the dice with all this stuff, but I think that's what Minnesota was probably thinking. This might be a trade that works out well for both sides. We'll see.
No, I think it's a win-win. The trade itself, I guess the only reason you mentioned the trade, and we're talking about the position. It's funny though. I mean, I think when we're handicapping games, I think a lot of people get blinded by power ratings. I think you got to be able to read between the lines and have some outside the box thinking. And it's just funny. As we're getting closer to the draft, I get why they did it. They want production and they want it instantaneously, but to give up the equity they gave up to get the guy, it just made me think. And Beane's been pretty good. I mean, Brandon Beane's a pretty sharp guy. He's done a great job really rebuilding that team into a contender. And I wonder if, in a weird way, he's not telling you that, yeah, they're all nice players, but, they're not home runs. They're not all home runs, and everybody acts like they're all home runs. Yeah,
that's true. And we see this a lot in other positions, too. In the quarterbacks, I think, are even more magnified with that. But, a lot of position groups, the draft type, it just doesn't you see that every year, but the receivers in particular this year, that might be the case. Although, across the board here, that group and the offensive tackles seem to be getting a lot of attention from draft projections and these mock drafts as we lead up into next week.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. Well, they're not sexy, Bruce, but honestly, at the end of the day, 3 years later is when you look back and you say, damn, that team nailed it. And you look at some of the teams that have had the great draft. They're guys that picked up a great offensive lineman, a great defensive lineman, a weak side linebacker, a special teams guy that 2 years later turned into a bargoon that was a starter and is flying all over the field and making plays. And 3 years later, you're going, well, I didn't think much of that draft back then, but by a mile, they won the draft.
Yeah, and sometimes teams miss on these linemen too. I mean, or you invest a lot. I mean, Denver had Garrett Bowles its first pick a few years ago. It hasn't exactly worked out too well.
I'll throw one at you, bud. I mean, One of the biggest busts, it was a top 5 pick, and again, being a Bills fan, Mike Williams from Texas. This guy, I mean, they had Hall of Famer. I mean, he's a monster. He's this. I mean, the guy had a heart the size of a grape. And when you miss on a top 5 pick, it sets you back 5 years. And I forget how long the drought was, because thankfully the Bills have been in the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years. But wasn't their playoff drought like 11 years or something stupid? I mean, when you miss on a top 5 pick, your team goes off the tracks for years.
Yeah. I think the drought was a bit longer than that, but you're right.
I think you're longer than that.
Yeah. Walt Patulski.
Forget it.
Yeah.
Walt Patulski, first overall.
Yeah, and I remember, the 76 draft when the Bucks and the Seahawks came in, and
Leroy Selman.
Leroy Selman, Bucks, and then the Seahawks took Steve Niehaus out of Notre Dame, and Selman turned out to be a heck of a lot better than Niehaus was.
Yeah.
So, and these are linemen. But the sizzle picks right now also, the edge rusher now, that's the big thing, the Chase Young model. And so those guys now seem to be kind of in vogue. But I always look at players who you could just tell the way they controlled and dominated a game in college. That's why, Isaiah Simmons from Clemson, we mentioned him a moment ago, his stock, I think, has moved up quite a bit. Just the GMs and anybody watching say, look, every game you watch with Clemson, this guy was everywhere. He was making plays. And this leads me into the one special guy I hope teams pick this year, and that would be Lynn Bowden from Kentucky, who was a receiver until about the 4th game last year, and all the injuries happened at Kentucky. He would have been a 3rd or 4th round pick as a receiver. They moved him to quarterback. He picked up the playbook within a week. Ended up rushing for about 1,500 yards in just over half the season for Kentucky. And I know Burrow was going to win the Heisman, but this guy is a Swiss Army knife sort of a player. And that Taysom Hill model works. And I love, you get Bowden and you get a guy like him that can return kicks, and he's a receiver, can end up starting for you. He's also your emergency quarterback. That's the sort of guy I hope Denver, which is my favorite team, picks a guy like that. But I think a guy like that could be a real sleeper and help somebody.
And only because you mentioned it while you were talking. Computers are a pretty wonderful thing. And when I literally fought cell phones for a decade, and I'm moderately serviceable now on the computer. Our producer Mike's cringing, going, "Yeah, if you think so." But I went back to the 1985 draft. You're like, who are the dominant guys? And I said, I'm curious. Bruce Smith popped in my head for whatever reason. He just was dominant. So I typed in 1985 NFL draft, and I'm looking at, who went at the top there? So, all right, Smith was the top player, Hall of Famer. Then it was Bill Fralick, Ray Childress, Chris Dolman, terrific player. Dwayne Bickett, Lomas Brown was really good. Ken Rutgers, Ron Holmes, Kevin Allen, Al Toon was number 10. Anyway, I was just curious while you were talking, and I looked down with the 16th pick,
Jerry Rice,
that they acquired from New England. The 49ers got Jerry Rice. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, you see this every year where guys in the draft fall like that, and that's a great example. I'm just looking the same year. I mean, Andre Reed goes in the 4th round of the Bills. There's a great player they got, and look all the players that went ahead of him. The quarterbacks,
Hall of Famer, as it turned out,
sure,
4th round.
Yeah, and but the quarterbacks are the one that's really magnified, and I think for good reason too, because so many of these guys end up not doing it. And again, I've pointed this out in our segments here, Brian, but last year at this point, all the quarterbacks we were talking about last year, we didn't expect Daniel Jones to go that high, but also by the time he got to midseason last year, there were 3 starters who were rookies, and one was Jones because he knocked Eli out of the job after about 3 weeks. The other 2, Gardner Minshew, Washington State with the Jags. Nobody was talking about him at the draft last year. He's a late round pick to the Jags from Washington State, and Duck Hodges from the Steelers, and Samford, who wasn't even picked. And there were circumstances in Pittsburgh that put him there, but he had to still make the team, and he had to play well enough in preseason. So 2 of the 3 guys that were starting at quarterback last year by midseason, none of them were talking about on draft day.
The crazy thing, just for a chuckle, because while it was on there, and I'm sitting there looking at it, in a quarterback league, and all the talk about the quarterbacks in 1985, the first quarterback, let me just make sure. Bernie Kosar went with a supplement. Well, he went in a supplemental draft. So Bernie Kosar went, was the top quarterback, and he went in the summer before the draft in the supplemental draft. Right. But then the first quarterback really on draft day that was taken was Randall Cunningham. And then talk about drop-off, that Frank Reich went with the first pick of the third round to the Bills, who was he won some big games, but he was a backup basically to Jim Kelly his entire career. And then you scroll down the list and you look at some of the names at quarterback, and you're shaking your head going, wow, what a year for just no quarterbacks available coming out of college football. I mean, that's how cyclical this stuff can be. I mean, you had to go to the 6th round to find Steve Bono and Rusty Hilger.
Yeah.
Nobody was taking a quarterback in that draft.
I was going to say in the first 5 rounds, I think Reich and Randall were the only 2 that went in the first 5 rounds, I think.
Could you imagine something like that happening in this day and age?
No, I couldn't. And that's how crazy some of this stuff is. It's also funny. You look like that was the day of the 12-round drafts. I can remember the days of the 17-round drafts too, and I'm sure you can as well. So now we got a nice, neat 7-round draft. But for a long time, they were going 12 rounds with this stuff, and then these teams really start reaching once you got into those double-digit rounds.
By the way, I think I got a funny feeling. I think, is that not something that will happen here in the next not too distant future, that we maybe end up with more than 7 rounds? I can see them adding a couple of rounds, 2-3 rounds. And honestly, Bruce, I think when sports comes back, and I don't think you change your entire business model right now, because we don't know what the future will hold. But I mean, I would think even next year in sports, if the NBA, the NHL, and some of these leagues are able to come back with condensed schedules, but then next year's coming up with so many gray areas, and with the coronavirus or future, things that can cause public health problems. But I'm looking at the NBA and the NHL next season. I think they're going to have condensed schedules. They're going to be playing a lot more back-to-back games. They're going to take buys out. They may blow the all-star games out because time is their enemy, to the point where I think those leagues, it would behoove them to expand rosters just so that their players can survive the ripple down effect of what this may bring to the table, and then you bleed it back into football. I wonder if they don't add more drafts, and I wonder if roster size doesn't go up in all leagues.
Well, that's a good question, and I think I got to double check the CBA, the new one they just signed in the NFL. That may have provided to expand the rosters anyway. And it might be up, the active roster might be up to 50. I've got to double check that, but I think
it has gone up.
Yeah, it's one of the provisions, and the schedule's expanding. I mean, they're going to an extra regular season game, 17. So, yeah, I think now as it relates to the draft, that's possible that they could expand some in the draft. Though the trend line over the generations here has been to pare this stuff down. That would be a little bit of a change. I mean, the NBA draft used to be many rounds, and I'm not sure that in the baseball draft has a lot of rounds anyway. But the general in the NHL, but the general swing, at least the NFL and the NBA, has been for lesser rounds. So we'll see. But that's certainly possible. Maybe they could switch that around.
This isn't an NFL topic per se, but it could eventually get to them. They've got the luxury of time that other leagues do not. But I'm curious, Bruce, as a broad discussion, if sports is to return without fans, then transition into social distancing with fans at games, and at a hockey game, 18,000 seat arena, maybe you got 7,000 people in there. An 80,000 seat football stadium, all of a sudden now it comes down that there are 25 or 30,000 people there. Massive lost revenue with gate receipts. I wonder if all leagues may adopt, we have to sign an emergency CBA for the short term, because all these guys that are making a gazillion bucks, and God bless them for doing it, but if the playing field is changed in terms of revenue, it's, there's two sides to a coin. The owners don't have to be the ones that are, taking a headshot here and taking a big lighter to money because they're paying all this money, but no one's going to the games. I think that's something to watch for. I think there's going to have to be some give and take here from a collective bargaining perspective. And I think that's something to really watch for in the next 3-4 months that I don't think anybody's even talked about.
Yeah, when you they have the mechanisms in place to set salary caps and all are based upon the previous year too, and if you had that sort of a situation, this unique situation now. Yeah, you would think that, and I'm not sure what the provisions are. I think each sport's going to have to deal with that. But the revenues now, the live gate is still an important part of the revenue. But if you're looking at that reducing some, and I think just in general, attendances would be down even if they lifted everything, just because a lot of people will be a little bit more reluctant to go, I would think. That changes the live gate. That would have been a lot more important years past before the TV money was so overwhelmingly the big driver of this stuff. But you're right. I think that the whole revenue model is going to change somewhat, and because of at least the live gate portion of it figures to drop perhaps considerably.
Hey, here's an idea to get ourselves out of this rabbit hole and look to the future. I think they should be, whatever task force you're putting together, you should be including the people from Wimbledon, because for 17 years, they had an insurance policy with the words worldwide pandemic in it.
Yes.
It made $141 million, and they canceled the thing early because of the uncertainty. They may have been able to play, but likely fans wouldn't be there. But to have the foresight they had 17 years ago, and then the foresight to do this and cash in $141 million, these are the smartest guys in sports right now. They should be using them to solve our future problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of these disaster scenarios didn't include pandemics. The insurance companies will up the premiums now. I will guarantee you that on the pandemic interruptions in the future. But
I mean, included in there were the words worldwide pandemic. Bruce,
yeah.
I mean, insurance is such a scam. I paid for insurance, when I'm back in Buffalo, I got my house and I paid for insurance. I'm like 20 years into paying for insurance, and my big windstorm blows my fence down.
Yeah.
And the guy says, well, the fence was old and decrepit and it was depreciated. Like, he wasn't going to give me anything. I raised holy hell. I said, I've been paying you. And he was like a friend. Like, and I said, I've been paying. I says, you're replacing that fence. So I mean, guys, swear to God, I fought and I got it. But the insurance company sitting there trying to say to me, oh, they had an out. Oh, the fence was old and depreciated. Please, or like flood insurance, like, all these things you're paying for insurance, but water damage is not included. You've got to have every little word that's in there.
Oh yeah, that's the whole insurance game. And there were some entities here with that got knocked out with this, where the pandemic didn't cover it. And so you're right, that will change. The NC2A was able to recoup not the entirety of the basketball tournament, but about 35-40% of it through their insurance policy. So it did kick in there too, but they didn't get the whole deal. But you're right, that changes. Hopefully we won't have to deal with this again.
I know, but things we don't ever want to think of.
It'll be in our minds for many years for sure.
All right, I'll play a little pop quiz with you, and we'll wrap it up on this. Back to the NFL draft. Give me. It's unfair, but it's something to do. Give me the guy you think is the potential biggest bust, and I think you may have already mentioned the guy you think is the home run or the diamond in the rough. But who do you think? Let's start with who do you think the biggest bust is?
It could be Joe Burrow.
Wow, there you go.
Before this time last year, nobody was talking about him as a first-round pick. He had everything working right, but he's going to a bad team. And listen, had Archie Manning gone to the Steelers, and Terry Bradshaw, they were a year apart. But what if Terry Bradshaw got picked by the Saints in 1970? I bet he would have been out of the league by the mid-'70s. There's a good chance he would have been. Archie would have been a Hall of Famer. So it's where you end up. And I'm not at all sure Burrow, because where he's going, he's not gonna have the advantages he had. I like him. I think he's got a lot of upside. But there you go, right off the bat. It might not work. He's on a bad team, and we know how quarterbacks go. So there's one. My guy, I mentioned to you earlier in the segment here, but it's Lynn Bowden from Kentucky. I hope somebody goes for him. He was my favorite guy last year. So I would think of him. By the way, the one other position group that seems to be out of favor, tight ends. There doesn't seem to be many of those projected, but maybe Cole Kmet from Notre Dame. I think he could even sneak into the first round somewhere. I think he's a big time player, and you're going to maybe see some teams start to use tight ends a little bit more moving forward here, and he might be the best of that lot.
All right, I'm going to throw one in there, but it's not like I'm the rocket scientist, but it's a smaller school, and a lot of these guys, like you mentioned, an Andre Reed, Kutztown State. A lot of times you got to go to the big name program, and guys are, they pay the price for where they went to school. I think this Antonio Gandy Golden kid from Liberty is a stud, and I said this, and I was right about this with the Cowboys, and everybody loved the Cowboys 2 years ago. I'm like, they got no shot. They got diminutive wide receivers. They got no one that can put the ball in the end zone in the red zone. They're all small wide out. I mean, if Elliott doesn't run it in, they're going to settle for field goals, and that's exactly what happened. You need the red zone, a big guy, and this kid is 6'4". He's a stud. I'm watching his highlights. Honestly, I'm trying to think maybe it's unfair to the kid, but I'm looking at him. He's got a dose of Randy Moss to me. I mean, and he's a beast. I don't know. I'm looking at this kid as this is going to be a name we're going to be hearing about in the NFL. And the question is, how high would somebody take the kid because he played at Liberty?
Well, he's a big target. I could see him doing it. Two others I'll throw in there real quick. Bryce Perkins, quarterback, Virginia. I'm seeing a lot of the draft things knock him. Did anybody watch Virginia last year? He was the whole bloody team. He could do everything. The modern day of the NFL, there's room for a Bryce Perkins. And I mentioned tight ends before. Colby Parkinson, Stanford. Stanford's had a bunch of guys going to the NFL from a bunch of tight ends excel in the NFL. And Parkinson, that Stanford's offense bogged down. It wasn't his fault last year, but Parkinson could be the next Stanford tight end star, and he'll be a third, fourth round pick maybe.
All right, here, let me throw it to the NFL then for you. Did anybody watch the Seahawks last year? I mean, the whole bloody team was Russell Wilson.
Yes. There you go.
Good stuff, Bruce. Hey, the Gold Sheet, I know you got your mock draft up there.
Yeah, it's up there at goldsheet.com. I got some old best of things in there, but it's up there. It's also up Vegas Insider and but VSiN too. But at goldsheet.com, yeah, we got the draft preview up there, and it's a good read even for what teams have been doing in the offseason thus far with the free agent stuff. So up there, goldsheet.com.
All right, we're getting ever closer. The NFL draft, and boy, are we in our next gathering going to have plenty to discuss. It'll be after day one, and we'll preview round two, and that'll be the next time we get together. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, Brian. Look forward to it.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com, and reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.